Hey there, everybody. I'm Michael Osinski.
And I am Tyler Esselman.
And you are listening to This One Goes to 11.
This One Goes to 11 is Michael's and my podcast, a music podcast where we invite people we love, people we find interesting, people we're intrigued by, to come join us and make their case for what they believe is a perfect album.
So perfect that 10 out of 10 just isn't good enough.
Nope, no siree, Bob.
Every time we record these intros, I realize whenever we try and describe the podcast and we say like Michael's and my or Tyler's and my, like there's no proper pronoun for that, is there?
Am I saying it correct? It would be Michael's and my, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Grammar's a pain.
Grammar's elitist. I don't know. Who needs grammar?
I mean, that is kind of the view in academia right now.
Got to be honest about it.
Yeah.
You know who might be interested in a conversation about the who's, the what's, and the wherefores about grammar?
Tell me, Tyler, who?
This week's guest might be interested in having that conversation with us someday. This week, we are talking to the one, the only, Jessica Winingham. Jessica Winingham is a professional actress and full-time high school theater teacher and director in St. Louis, Missouri. While she is a huge music junkie, visual art hound, and general lover of all things creative, she is also a proud, queer woman of color. Finally, she is a massive geek who loves Star Trek Voyager, The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Star Wars, Game of Thrones, etc. And we'll mention this a little bit in the pod itself, but she was my high school theater teacher for 1 year, in one beautiful, beautiful year. It was amazing.
And also fellow Scorpio.
Fellow Scorpio. Yeah, you two are Scorpio suns. I'm a Scorpio moon. And I should have known. I should have known that she was a Scorpio.
Yeah, I can often tell. I can often tell when people are, like, Corin Tucker from Slater-Kinney, Frank Ocean, who shares my exact birthday, but
Wesley Toledo, friend of the pod, Wesley Toledo, noted Scorpio.
That's
right.
His
birthday's coming up in a few days here.
Yeah.
We have a great conversation with Jess. I really I had been looking forward to inviting her to be on. She's a formative presence in my creative life, just in my life in general. What a great gal, and she brought an all-timer to the table, didn't she?
Yeah, an album we had been waiting to talk about, and really a fitting end to season 5.
Yeah,
this will be our final conversation about one album for season 5. Of course, we got bonus stuff ready for you, but more about that later.
It's going to be a really good one that I think you all will enjoy. So, without any further ado, should we get into it?
Let's shall, Tyler. Let's shall.
Jessica freaking Winingham, how are you today? And welcome to This One Goes to 11.
I am fantastic. I turned 40 last Saturday. Or Sunday, excuse me. Yes. And today is a party that Atlee, my spouse, has planned for me that I don't know what is happening. But my best friend is coming in from out of town in Virginia. She's in the air right now. So it's going to be a great day. And for me, as like an Uber nerd, I'm really hoping right now in St. Louis, there's a virtual reality Star Trek room.
Yes.
And if that's what we're doing tonight, like, I am here for it.
It sounds likely. It sounds likely that might be the thing. If you already have that top of mind.
Yeah.
That's so cool. I'm honored that we're the beginning of that, that day for you. It's going to be a full day of fun then.
Yes.
And I appreciate all the Scorpio energy in the Zoom room right
yes.
now.
Yeah.
I'm November 23rd. I'm the first day of Sagittarius. I'm basically a Scorpio.
You're cusp. Yeah.
Scorpio and a Scorpio moon. So you are two of my favorite, most important Scorpios in my entire life in one room together. Can you believe that?
Amazing.
Yeah.
So Jessica, if you would, please, let's kill the suspense here. What album hath thou brought before the tribunal today?
It's a classic, and I feel like everyone knows it's a perfect album, but Rumours by Fleetwood Mac.
I've heard of it.
rings a bell.
It's one of those things that, like, every time someone says what's a perfect album, it's one of the first ones that pops into my mind. I mean, there's many, but that's the one I'm just like, ugh, the album cover through the song titles through the drama that we all know those songs are based on. And it's like the most quintessential like 70s vibe. And I love every song.
Good, strong start. This one, it's definitely been on lists before, right, Michael? And I think this was on our short list of albums that, like, if we saw it, we were pretty much going to go for it on somebody's list, right?
I don't think anyone had brought it forward yet, but yeah, like as we've told our listeners, there is a list of albums that as soon as someone suggests it, it goes right to like we're recording it. And so when this was a no-brainer when you put this on your list. So although I will say your list was quite strong.
Oh, thank you.
You'll be happy to know that one of your albums, actually, by the time this episode airs, we will have covered one of your other albums. Tori Amos's Little Earthquakes, we're covering.
Well, okay, so she's my Lord and Savior. So I am a quintessential. You know what's so funny is, like, I grew up on Tori Amos, and I first was introduced to her by a dear friend when I was 9. And as a queer person growing up, I knew I was bisexual, but I thought I was very, like, I don't know. I mean, I knew I was quirky, but I didn't really think that I fit into queer culture very much. Mm-hmm. And then the night I met Atlee, my spouse, they were like, what kind of music do you like? And I was like, well, Tori Amos is like my whole world. And they were like, you are so gay. they're like, you're so gay. And I was like, what? No, I'm not. And they were like, yeah, no, that's a real strong queer answer. So yes, she's like my North Star.
I think, and we also had it wasn't at the drive-in, but it was the Mars Volta that we talked about earlier in the season. And I know you're an at the drive-in gal, so it's
totally.
Good representation of your musical taste on this season of the pod. That's what I'm saying.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, before we get too deep into the album itself, or you, Jess, like we want to give our listeners a little opportunity to get refreshed on Fleetwood Mac and this album. If they don't know who Fleetwood Mac is, though I don't know how that would be possible, we have a segment that is intended just for them. Michael, what is that segment called?
It is called The Beginner's Guide to Fleetwood Mac's Rumours in 60 Seconds.
Yes, and you have shouldered the task today, haven't you? How are you feeling about this task?
I mean, it's a sizable task, and I will say that when I do this, I take a bunch of notes first. And I looked at all my notes. I'm like, yeah, I can fit that all in. And then I realized that I had like 2 Google Doc pages worth of notes. And I'm like, no, this does not. No. I need to pare this down because there's just so much, especially this album. There's so much about it available to us because of all the drama around it and all the journalism about it and people like Mick Fleetwood's memoir. Like, there's so much to take in. So it was. I don't know. I think I did all right, but this is our season closer, and I'm not afraid to go out on a not so bang.
You are the finale, Jess. That's we
exciting.
Say, yes, I'm honored. This is brevity being the soul of wit. You always do bring it into that 60-second window, which that's a feat unto itself.
I'm a little worried about this one. I might go out a hair over on this one, but we'll see.
I did last week. Rules are meant to be broken a little bit, right? I guess that's yeah. We can go with that. I got a minute on the clock. Are you ready, buddy?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, and just remember, this is the beginning of the case making. You get to assess how Michael does in whatever grading terms you'd like, scoring terms you'd like. Okay. You'll be assessing his work. All right. We got a minute on the clock. You're starting in 3, 2, 1, go.
How do I begin to capture the drama surrounding Fleetwood Mac? There's the blues guitarist founder whose bad LSD trip led to a mental breakdown. There's a producer who tried to launch a tour with different musicians under the name Fleetwood Mac. And then there's all the drugs, breakups, and bed hopping of their most well-known lineup. Brits Mick Fleetwood, John McVie, and Christine Perfect McVie, an American duo Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks. But what about the music? 1977's Rumours, which was technically the band's 11th studio album, was their first concerted attempt to make a pop album. The title, suggested by John, refers to the way band members were writing journals and diaries about each other through the music. It spawned 4 top 10 singles and contained the only song in the band's history to give all 5 members writing credits, The Chain. To this day, it is the 9th best-selling album of all time. And the band continued to enjoy success in the 80s before a few members chose to go their own way, but they reunited for 1997's concert album, The Dance, and they still exist today, just without Buckingham, who was suing some of the other band members, and the true heart of the band, Christine McVie, who died in 2022.
Standing
Ooh.
ovation.
What did I say? I said you were going to do it in a minute. I said you were.
So good.
That was
Yeah.
par excellence, my friend.
Some things I didn't know that you said. I was like, oh, that was their 11th album? I had no idea.
11th Fleetwood Mac album, but with the people who were recording on the first album, I mean, barely any of them were still in the band, except for Mick Fleetwood is the only. I think Mick Fleetwood and John McVie were there close to the beginning, but they weren't even the founders of the band. So
yeah.
All right, Jess, how did he do? How would you? How did he kick off our conversation here? In whatever terms you like, how would you score him?
I would score him a standing ovation / bravo. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent.
I would take it.
Yes. Standing O / bravo, baby.
I appreciate that. But before we dive even further into the album, we do like to ask our guests about themselves. Could you tell us a little bit about the relationship the music has or has had in your life, writ large, as Tyler Esselman likes to say?
What a question. Oh, my God. I'm a music junkie and music hound, and I'm a child of the 80s. So my family had albums on our record player 24/7 in my house. So music has shaped a lot of my experiences and a lot of my, it's kind of like we all have these touchstones. And for me, songs are touchstones of years in my life or evolutionary moments of when I moved to New York and when I moved back to St. Louis or when I lived other places or when someone passed away. So music is a massive force in my life. And I cannot imagine, like every once in a while you meet someone who's like, I don't really listen to music, and my brain explodes. Like I don't understand how that's possible.
Right.
I don't. And so for me, it's like a member of my family, right? Like, and albums are like members of my family. Yeah. So when my father passed, I inherited a ton of his albums, and those are like precious to me, much more so than other things, because they're like these, for him, touchstones that he had for many years that I now get to enjoy. So music is like monumental. It's hard to describe how important it is to me. And I will say when I was younger, before the interwebs, it was different because music came to you through like friends and family. And if you were lucky enough, like to go to album stores and be able to buy them, it wasn't as accessible. Right. And like I used to record off the radio with my cassette player, you know, all that kind of stuff that now music is everywhere and so accessible, which I think is great. But in a way, it makes it like less precious because you can just find anything at any time through any means. And so there is a part of me that kind of misses the nostalgia of like someone gifting you an album or sharing a mixtape with you was like such a big deal because you couldn't afford to have those 10 CDs and now you have 10 songs for them. So yeah, music is it's very precious to me.
I gave you 3,000 points for calling songs or albums members of the family. That's an image I don't think has been shared yet, but it is really apt because that also makes me think about the evolution of your relationship with a song or an album, how it's changing just like it is with a member of your family.
No, can I tell you one of my favorite moments of music evolving? So I'm a huge Cure fan. I love The Cure.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And I grew up listening to The Cure like nonstop, especially in my angsty years. And I remember growing up, I think it was in my early 20s when I found out that Robert Smith of The Cure wrote Disintegration when he was happily married. And I felt so betrayed. I was like, that is my number one album. You were happily married the whole time. Like, how dare you? So now I listen to Disintegration. I still love it, but I'm like,
yeah,
it's just not the same.
Isn't that weird? But it also that there's like a myth that this is another myth that we're interested in is like the artist's anguish and whether it's actually the thing that brings, you know, the artist's anguish or trauma or hurt or whatever is that the root of the art of the thing that you're making?
Right.
I mean, Michael and I have discussed this ad nauseum in a variety of different venues over the years, but I think what we're discovering is probably not.
Yeah.
And it is a dangerous myth to kind of like try to continue, you know, because.
Oh, totally. And it's totally unfair for any consumer of art to expect that the artist has to emote and personally feel whatever it is that they're putting out there. I mean, it's completely insane. For sure. I'm glad Robert Smith is happily married, but there is it is very strong in music, especially where it's like if there's a really sad song, you want to put that on the artist. Like you want to believe for some reason that artist is going through that thing. And then when it does line up, like let's say Adele's 21, then you're like, oh, see, Adele had a really hard year. There it is.
Or Buckley. Jeff Buckley is another great example. That's kind of like, it felt like real close to the bone.
I think it sort of depends on, the artist, because I think about something like, I feel like we bring up Nine Inch Nails every other episode, but that's because I bring up Nine Inch Nails every other episode. But I think about the Downward Spiral as being an album, or like the Fragile, both of those albums as being created in a moment when Trent Reznor was in it. And like I consider those to be really great albums, but also, I don't know, the thing that I often tell students, acting students, is the idea that you should draw from a place of scar, not scab. Because I think sometimes when you have enough distance that you've healed from whatever the experience is, you have a better insight on things. Whereas if you're drawing from a place of a scab, you could reopen the wound.
Yes.
And then, I don't want to be the director who causes you to go back to, like, to pursue more therapy. So, I don't know. Like, I think it depends on the artist. Do I think Trent Reznor probably was a little unsafe when he was making those two albums? Yes. Definitely. But I don't know. I think at the age I am now, I'm kind of like, I'm going to give my problems some distance before I reflect on them artistically.
Oh, 100%. And Michael, I'm totally stealing that from you as a fellow theater teacher. Scar, not scab.
That's what I gave Jess 6,000 points for that. So that's adding to your case, Jess.
I'm helping you out here, yeah.
When I teach like Lee Strasberg's effective memory, I always use the 7-year rule, but I think scar not scab is smarter because I will say, like, if it's happened within the first 7 or the last 7 years, don't use it because it's too fresh. But I think scar not scab makes more sense because it really is hitting that place of like, you should have already kind of gone to the therapist and closed this loop before you touch it. Otherwise you shouldn't touch it. Yeah.
Well, what was the Stanislavski thing about boots, right? Is that he said you should wipe your boots at the door, or you can't wipe your boots. It's impossible to wipe your boots at the door. Am I?
I don't remember that.
Yeah, I don't remember that either. Who at DePaul told you that?
Maybe I'm misattributing a quote
Probably
here,
not.
but like it was that thing of like you walked through whatever on your way to rehearsal, right? And you walked through whatever shit, you stepped in whatever dog shit on your way to rehearsal. Are you going to be able to wipe that at the door and take your boots off at the door and leave that outside the room? Or by necessity, is that coming into the room with you?
That question, I think, in the year of our Lord 2023 is so different now because people do respect more now, which I think is really positive, artists as humans. And so acknowledging when they walk in, when it's clear that they are not in a place to be able or don't have the capacity to work that day, being like, you should go home. Like I'm very much that director. And I feel like Fleetwood Mac could have used some of that in the rehearsal.
Whatever do you mean?
Like Stevie Nicks maybe should have been told like, hey, you're maybe not in a place right now to work with Lindsay. Maybe
any of you, all of you need to we need to bring in an arbitrator. That's what we need to do is bring an arbitrator.
Left that out. I left that out of the bio because when I was like, okay, maybe I'll try and capture all the like bed hopping that was happening, but I realized that would have taken up 30 seconds of the 60. And I'm like, I can't cover it.
Also,
I can't imagine.
Could they just, if they just weren't snorting so much coke, maybe they could have handled the problems. But
yeah. The addiction and the substance element is right. That's something that we talk about a lot too. It's like, well, what is the substance doing to you? I think as I'm entering my 30s proper, I'm like, what is my relationship with intoxicants? And like, and I have friends that are getting sober, bless them. And like, it's a powerful, very, very powerful thing for people's creativity too, to get sober. If that's what your story, if that's the place that your story is brought to you. Right. So how able are you to really, we talk about vulnerability a lot, right? Ever since Brene brought it to the mainstream. Yep. We love Brene. But ever since we started this conversation about vulnerability properly, I think it's made me think you can do all of the things that you need to do creatively and still respect the people around you, still take care of the people that you need to take care of. And you don't need cocaine to do it, God damn it.
No.
Definitely not.
That statement, It's even so powerful of like, you can still do what you need to do and respect and care for others around you. Absolutely. And I think more and more that expectation is across the board in every industry, but the arts for sure. And I'm so proud of people for no longer putting up with abusive directors, abusive producers, abusive bandmates, abusive scene partners. Like, there's no reason. And it's not an excuse. This whole like wannabe LA method acting thing where like people are like, I'm in character for 6 months, so I get to abuse you for 6 months. I mean, it's just insane and it's ridiculous.
We've dropped a few names. We've dropped a few names of artists. You mentioned The Cure. You just mentioned you love Nine Inch Nails.
Yeah.
For everybody's context, I've said this in the intro already, but Jessica and I know each other because for one glorious year at the end of my high school career, Jessica was my theater teacher, and it was amazing. And we shared a lot of music back then. We just shared a lot. You exposed me to a lot of great just art in that year that we shared together, and it was formative for me. And so who are some of those other artists that like are at your core? Before we go into Fleetwood Mac, like what were the records that your dad had on? What were those records that you inherited from him? What was in the soup?
So I will tell you the very most important album I inherited from my dad that he played for me when I was very young was Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon.
Hell yeah.
And he loved that album so much and saw them in concert that he had 2 copies of it, thank God, so that when he passed, my brother and I didn't have to fight over it. He got one and I got one.
10,000 points to dad for having the foresight to do that.
I just remember being very young in my living room and hearing the beginning of Money, of The Change falling. That whole concept album just like really as a child was very powerful for me. I to this day love that album. The other thing that my dad really got me into is really heavy rock. So I love Led Zeppelin. I love Deep Purple. They're just like these 70s hard rock bands that very much transferred me into my youth. So like, I love a lot of really, like, I love the punk band Refused. I love all these bands that are very hard. And I think it came from that 70s hard rock and roll place. He was the most influential. My mom's side of it was more like singer-songwriter. So that's why I think why Tori Amos is my Lord and Savior is because my mom got me hooked on Joni Mitchell and Joan Armatrading really young. And so my brain has this like very immediate need to connect with like an individual and a piano or an individual and a guitar.
The so simple instrumentation that connected for you.
Yeah. So those were some of the main albums. But my dad also loved jazz, which I love jazz. And then I ended up, when I lived in New York, I worked at a jazz club. So that relationship has continued forever.
Which one? Which one did you work at?
The Jazz Standard, which it closed during COVID, which breaks my heart.
Is Smalls still open? Smalls, is that?
I have no idea. I loved Smalls. Oh my God. They're probably not. I bet COVID killed it. But
that is a vibe right there, as the kids.
Oh my God. BYOB, 3 a.m. So good.
I think the one time I was there, I think it was 3 a.m. and it was just the best thing.
It's probably only open from like 3 to 6 a.m.
That's what COVID did to it, probably. It's only some places just closed, and Smalls was just like, we're just going to stay open from 3 to 6. That's one of the most important.
We don't even have a license to be here, so we'll just
we're good.
This also feels like a good moment to say, hey, dear listeners, if any of you really want to talk about a jazz album, we'd be happy to do so because we really haven't done that yet on the show. There's a few genres that we haven't quite covered, but.
Doug Morell could have talked jazz with us, and maybe we'll need to bring Doug and Andrew back to talk jazz. I think that'd be fun. Was it your mom then that let's go to Fleetwood Mac? Do you remember how you discovered Rumours specifically? Was there an inflection point for you there? What do you remember about that?
You know what is so funny? I was thinking about doing this today, and I was trying to remember how I first heard it, and because, and we'll get to this, I'm a witch. It's almost magical because I literally have zero recollection of who first played it for me. I think it just manifested. So it's just manifested in my life.
It's kind of one of those albums, though, and I've used this term a little bit. I'm gonna coin a term, a wallpaper album, right? Because like it's so a part of the wallpaper, and probably at the time that you were listening to it already was. And I know it has been for me. For like that, we spoke about the album cover. Like you've just seen. It's one of those things you see from birth, essentially. That's how ubiquitous it seems to be.
Absolutely. And I will say one of the core memories or experiences it's tied to is my family has been camping in Montauk State Park in Missouri since the 60s. And so every summer, my whole family gets together and we camp together for like 3 days. And so
Beautiful.
that album is tied to when I show up there. It's such a place of calm and beauty that whenever I show up there, that dream specifically pops up in my head. But that whole album is like attached to this like beautiful place, because as like a little kid in the 80s, we would go, and it's like that album for some reason got attached to this beautiful, like outdoorsy, familial experience. And so that's like my earliest memory of it. But like you said, Wallpaper is totally accurate. I have no idea who first played it for me. It just became a part of my consciousness and has just never left.
Chances are probably your dad and your mom, because it rides that gap between what you're saying, that singer-songwriter, that singer-songwriter vibe from the 70s, and also the hard rock kind of thing, because those dudes shred like these.
Totally.
This is like a highly virtuosic, like musicians in this band. I'm going to give you 20,000 points from Montauk State Park.
Is this like Missouri State where the points don't matter?
The points always matter. Come on, they always matter.
You're right, Jeff. Don't listen to him.
Missouri State Parks don't get enough love, and so good on that. So Dreams, you said, is specifically the one that first hit you. Do you remember like how you started? Was it an album that was in heavy rotation for you as a young person? Like what are the times that you feel like you've most connected to this album in your life? Other than the camping, like how is it, I guess, like how has it continued to exist for you?
When I was very young, so I'm a classically trained singer. When I first started singing, I was like in middle school, and I was very picky about voices. And I remember thinking, so when I was a child, I loved Fleetwood Mac, and I got to middle school and I'm in my like snotty grunge years. And I remembered hating Stevie Nicks' vibrato because it's very rapid and I didn't like it. So for a while there, I was like, ugh, Stevie Nicks' vibrato, hate it. And then I went on and moved into college, and I kind of went through, like we all do, nostalgia phases of missing my youth. And I came back to Fleetwood Mac and really was grounded in, especially living in New York, grounded in my kind of Midwestern roots. For me, even though Fleetwood Mac is not from the Midwest, it felt very homey to me. And so I came back to it and loved it so much. And then fast forward years and years later, I moved back to St. Louis. I divorced my ex-husband. I'm getting remarried to my current spouse, Atlee. And when trying to think of what song I wanted to walk down the aisle to, I chose Dreams, because I felt like, in a lot of ways, me going through this whole journey of living in different countries and states and blah, 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 and then coming back to St. Louis and finding this home where I was really happy and meeting this person that is absolutely my soulmate, that I was like making a full circle, and it just felt really appropriate. And so Dreams was like the song I wanted to walk into my new life with.
Oh man.
Yeah. And it was really beautiful. And so I think my relationship with this album is just really based on growth and home. It just feels like home to me. Anytime I hear any song from this album, I'm like, oh yeah.
That's a million. You get 1 million points. This album feels like home to you. I can't think of many better reasons to continue a relationship with anyone or anything, right? If you're always looking for people who, and Atlee clearly feels like home to you as well. Yeah. Love that for you guys.
I'm gonna say that this feels just like the right time to listen to your standout track. Not to like you've already prefaced it for us. Let's just, dear listeners, if you've never heard this song, if you've never ridden on a skateboard while drinking a cranberry beverage, then here, we're going to play it for you for the first time. This is Dreams by Fleetwood Mac.
That's the end of part 1. If you access this episode via our YouTube playlist, you're about to hear our guest's standout track. If you'd like to jump ahead to part 2, you'll find a link in the description of this episode.